Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
All right. If you have a Bible, grab it. If you don't have a Bible, there are some on the table in the back. We'd encourage you to grab one there. There are some Bibles in the back as well in the lobby. Grab one of those. If you didn't get one of the Ruth journals, you're a little bit behind, and that's okay. We end today, but there are a stack of them under the monitor in the back in the lobby. Take one of those. You can give them as gifts. Take a couple of them. You can give them out as gifts or use them in your future study, whatever that looks like for you. They're there for you. So Ruth is what we are looking at. Ruth is in the Old Testament, which is the front half of your Bible, just after Joshua and Judges, just before all of the 1st and 2nd. So if you get to 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Kings, all of those books come back a little bit. As a church, this is what we do. We work through books of the Bible. We want to be shaped in our following of Jesus by the very Word of God. Not by the current cultural trends, not by self-help topics, not by politics, not by all of the things that would press in against us, but the constant, here's what we want to be shaped by, the constant, regular, next verse, next chapter, next book, looking at God's story of redemption found only in the pages of Scripture. This is what we've done for years and years. This is what we plan to continue to do. We want to see God for who He is and what He's accomplished in Christ in the pages of Scripture. Now, to that end, we also like to be encouraged by one another as we hear from one another about what we're learning. And so at the end, this has been our rhythm. At the end of every book, when we finish it out, we want to hear from you all and be encouraged by one another about what God is doing among us, even as we work through God's Word. And so I'm going to encourage you, if there's something that has been that's been impressed upon your heart or some way in which God has grown you, stretched you, whatever that is, over these last 5 weeks, I want you to email Eric at thetownchurch.org. Here's what I've learned from God. And we want to share those tomorrow as we record the podcast. So that eliminates the fear of you having to say that in front of a group of people. We will say that for you, but we want to hear from you. We want to be encouraged together by you. So Eric at thetownchurch.org, email him. What has God shown you through our time together in the book of Ruth? With that in mind, Ruth chapter 4 is what we are looking at this morning. We're finishing this 5-week series, just a very short series of the book of Ruth, this book sandwiched in between Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's this narrative that helps bridge the gap so that we can get into the lives of the people who are working through this stuff, who've experienced these things. And so because Ruth is a short book, 4 chapters long, one story, it's not broken up into different places. It's one story. It's very clear that the author wants us to see the ongoing story and continue it one after another, thing after thing. But we've had to break it up over 4 weeks because it's a lot to take in. Here's what I want to do. I want to give you a really quick recap of the entire book before we get to chapter 4 because it's the whole flow of the book. So here we go. Hold on. We are in a period of the time of Judges. Judges were the leaders who were commissioned by God to bring rescue to His people from their rebellion and from the consequences of sin among the people. Often those consequences that God brought to the people were through the attacks of the enemy nation. So we're in a period of time where what was the repeated refrain in the book of Judges? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That was the kind of time frame that we're in, rebellion and chaos. And so the people had judges that would rule over them. They didn't have a king to lead them forward, even though God had promised long ago for a king to come. That king had not yet come yet. So we're in a dark period of time for God's people. And on top of that, here's how the book starts. On top of that, there was a famine in the land. So the story begins by telling us about a man by the name of Elimelech. Elimelech and his wife Naomi had two sons, and these two sons, they take off to Moab to try to find food. Moab is an enemy territory of pagan idol worshipers. They go there to try to find food, and when they arrive in Moab, we're told that Elimelech dies. This is the first 5 verses. It starts out in grief. Elimelech, the father and the husband, dies. This leaves Naomi with her two sons in Moab. But the two sons, they also die. They find Moabite wives, they get married, but then the sons die, and so it leaves Naomi with 2 daughters-in-law in a land that's not her own land, grieving. It's an intense period of time of grief for Naomi, a time period that's certainly rocking her faith. We know that because of what she's said, potentially what little faith she has left over 10 years of being in a pagan culture. Can you imagine that? You're not in a culture of other people who are worshiping God. You're in a place that's completely isolated from that. And so you can imagine that her faith is being rocked. She's away from her God-fearing community in Bethlehem. She's away from all that. So during that 10-year period of time for Naomi hears that God has provided again for his people back in Bethlehem, and the famine's over. And so Naomi takes her one daughter-in-law and decides to head back home to Bethlehem. Orpah, the other daughter-in-law, decides to stay in Moab. Ruth clings. We're told she clings to Naomi, the other daughter-in-law. Ruth clings to her and commits to Naomi and commits to Naomi's God and commits to God's ways and God's people. And so they travel back to Bethlehem. And when they arrive, Naomi makes it very clear that she's coming back emotionally and spiritually exhausted. She calls herself, I'm not calling her this, she calls herself bitter. And she's very open about her thoughts about who God is and what he's done. He's the one who's brought this on me. He's the one who's brought calamity on me. He's the one who's brought this suffering and this hardship to my life. Ruth, her daughter-in-law, on the other hand, knows that life has got to go on. And she's committed to care for Naomi. And so she goes in search of food in the fields of the harvesters. And when she gets to the field, she, we're told, happens upon a man by the name of Boaz. Boaz, who's a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. And Boaz cares for Ruth in that moment. He protects her, cares for her, sends her back to Naomi with some 50 pounds of grain to care for them. And when she returned, Ruth returns to Naomi, and Naomi hears that Boaz has extended kindness to Naomi comes up with this brilliant plan. We saw this last week. Brilliant and really strange plan. That Ruth should go back to the threshing floor where Boaz is sleeping and steal his blankets so he gets cold. Remember that? It's kind of a strange way to do this. She does that so that Boaz would awake and begin to interact with her. And the plan works out exactly as Naomi had hoped. Ruth carries it out. Boaz wakes up. He sees Ruth. Ruth basically proposes to Boaz, will you marry me? Would you take on the role of redeemer, a typical role during this period of time that assumes the responsibilities of husband, assumes the responsibilities of provider, takes over in that way. And Boaz commits to her. That is, unless the one who's in front of him in line wants to take on that role instead. Because there's a closer relative who would move into that role. There's a closer relative than Boaz who has first dibs on that. And so that's where chapter 3 left us last week. Almost as if the author wants us to keep reading and keep seeing what's going on. We're not sure what will happen. Hopefully none of you read ahead so that you don't know. Ruth is going to be married, we know that. We don't know to whom yet, but will she marry Boaz or this unidentified relative? Boaz is supposed to track all that down and get some information. And so that's the story. It's It's actually a really compelling story that's sandwiched in between Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel. It draws us all in to seeing the people of that day. And if you've read the story before, which I'm sure many of you have, you know the point of the story is not just a story about grief, although that's where we started, and that's where I think the thread throughout the book is this deep grief. It's not just a story about grief. There's a greater story being told. It's a story of redemption, to be sure, but if we see it only as a few widows receiving care from a family member, we've missed the point. And if we only see it as a story of kindness, of some unlikely people toward one another, I think we've missed the point. And if we only see it as a love story of a woman who happens to wander into the field of her Hallmark movie opportunity, we've missed the point. So this morning, we wrap this up and see the whole thing coming together in, a story of redemption. The first thing we see in chapter 4, I think, is this. The land is redeemed. Let me walk through that and I'll show you what I mean. The land is redeemed. If you'll look at chapter 4, we'll read through verse 9. It says, "Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down here.' And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, 'Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you.' And he said, 'I will redeem it.' Then Boaz said, 'The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance.' Then the Redeemer said, 'I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it.' Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, 'Buy it for yourself,' he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, 'You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon.' The land is redeemed. Boaz, here's how this goes. Boaz goes to the gate, which is probably on his way back from the threshing floor, because you remember that Boaz said, 'I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to figure it out quickly.' He'll try to settle the matter of this relative situation soon. And so likely on his way home from the threshing floor, he goes to the gate, which is a place in this day where legal agreements were settled. They would go to the gate and they would settle these things out. It was either that or it was a place where people gathered. It was just I'll meet you at the gate. I'll meet you at the gate. It was a gathering place for people on their way in and out of the city. So Boaz is probably hopeful that this other relative at some point will come through the city gate and Boaz can try to get an answer from that relative. So that's his hope. And that's exactly what happens. We see this in verse 1, that Boaz sees him and says, 'Hey there, friend, come on over here and sit down, why don't you?' It's from the north. He's from North Dakota, so he says, 'Why don't you?' So it's interesting, though, I think that the author doesn't give the name of the relative. I don't know if you've caught this. We've brought this up many times that so many of the names in the book of Ruth so far have given us names, and their meanings are very important. But for this guy, this relative, the author doesn't give a name at all. In fact, the wording that we see here, friend, in verse 1, is actually not the word that we would see for friend. It's a Hebrew word that it's made up. It's an unidentifiable word that they've put together, something that many scholars have come to an agreement that says something like so-and-so or what's his face. So Boaz says to what's his face, sit down here for a second and let's talk. And Boaz gathers 10 men of the city around, elders who are passing through the gates, and says, hey guys, sit down and let's talk. And they begin to gather around in this makeshift courtroom kind of setting, and Boaz begins to explain the situation, saying, Naomi has come back from Moab. She's selling this plot of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Now let's pause for a second. Let me give you some insight in the customs of that day, a few specifics. It was custom in this day that land was not to be sold. What I mean is if you had land, you had land. It was yours, it was the family land. And the only way that you didn't have land is if it was handed then down to your relatives. And so it was all in the family, but it didn't leave the family. It wasn't typically removed from your family at all. But remember what's happened to Naomi. Naomi and family left 10 years previous. And so it's quite probable that when they left in the middle of famine, they sold the rights of their land to someone else so that they could get money for their travel expenses or to find food whenever they got there. Probably sold it to somebody who wasn't a family member. But now Naomi is back, and if she wants rights to her family land, the family land that's been in their system, it's going to have to be purchased back. It's going to have to be brought back in. But Naomi doesn't have the resources to get the rights back to the land. She needs someone to step in and redeem the land. And that someone would need to be a relative because those rights were passed from relative to relative to relative. So that's what's being sold, is the right to use the land. And so Boaz says to what's-his-face, I thought I'd tell you about this opportunity since you're first in line. You have first dibs. I've gathered some of the elders, the leaders of the city, and I thought I'd tell you that if you'd like to redeem the land, say it now because you're in the presence of all of us, and it'll be yours. But if not, if that's not the direction you want to go, then I'm next in line. And so what's-his-face says at the end of verse 4, I'll redeem it. Sure, I'll grab that. Now, isn't it interesting that Boaz doesn't immediately tell him about Ruth? I don't know why that's the case, but he doesn't immediately tell him that Ruth is a part of that deal. But he adds to it later. After what's-his-face agrees to the deal, he adds, and also, when you buy back the rights of the land, you must also agree to take Ruth as your wife. And then he says something I think that's extremely important for us to take in. He says, taking Ruth as your wife will do what? Will perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. These are the words of a worthy man, Boaz. That's what he's been called. He's a worthy man, Boaz. Of most concern to Boaz is not the land, but what the land means to the family name. The honoring of Elimelech and the family before him and the family in front of him. If Ruth, the widowed wife of Elimelech's son, is taken as the wife with the land, and Ruth has children, any children at all, the name goes on, ensuring the land continues on as an inheritance to future generations. Boaz is a worthy man. We've already seen he has extended loving kindness, and we see it here as well. There was this built-in plan for God's people from God's law for the care of widows. And this is what Boaz is doing. He's extending that. In Deuteronomy 25, there are laws for God's people about the care of women who have lost their husbands, these widows. And the way that God has worked that out in his law in Deuteronomy 25 is this, that the brother would step in and take over the care of the family. Neither Boaz nor what's-his-face are brothers. They're relatives somewhere down the line. So they're not bound to the law. But there's a moral obligation. There's something that ought to push them in that direction, to care for these widows. And Boaz is all in. But what about what's-his-name? After hearing that the commitment is more than just to the land, but it's also to Ruth, what's-his-name says, actually on second thought, giving it some thought, on second thought, I cannot redeem the land for myself and also take on this wife. What does he say? I think we see this difference between Boaz and what's-his-face. He says, because it will impair my own inheritance, or it will deplete all of my resources to take on the land and with it this woman. That's a load I'm not sure I want to take on. Because it's not just Ruth, it's also Naomi as well. Ruth was married for 10 years previous and didn't have any children. Who's to say that she'll even be able to have children? It feels like a risky move that might wipe me out financially, and there's nothing really to show for that. Boaz, you can have the right of redemption yourself. I just can't do it, as I've given it some thought. And so the author gives us this kind of a parenthetical aside about the custom of the day, saying, and again, drawing from Deuteronomy 25 and the laws that are there. If the brother in the day refused to take on the responsibility of the widow wife, he was then taken to the elders of the city, and the widow, this is the custom of the day, the widow would pull off his sandal. The person who wouldn't do what he was supposed to do, she would pull off his sandal and spit in his face. And the man would then have a mark on his name and on his house, and that mark would be, again, from Deuteronomy 25, that very last sentence up here. The mark on his house would be the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. Now, how would you like that to be the mark on your house? The mark of the man who had his sandal pulled off. This custom has been rolled into now redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. So hang with this. I know this gets a little bit strange. Last week we handed out wheat to all the kids. This week we're handing out one sandal to every kid. So we're not going to do that. Hang with this. This custom's been now rolled over into what they're doing. So what's-his-name says, no, I don't want to do that. He gives up that responsibility, hands Boaz the sandal quickly, maybe so he doesn't get spit on. And Boaz then turns to the elders and says, you've seen it. You've seen all this go down. You know the custom. I've got the sandal. All that belonged to Elimelech, to Kilion, to Mahlon, the family, has been now transferred over to me. Boaz redeems the land. But it's much more than just the land. We know that. Boaz knew that. We know that the story is much more than just a land acquisition. Look at verse 10. He says, also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I've bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. For Boaz, it's not just about the land being redeemed. It's about Ruth as well, and so we see Ruth is redeemed. We have this whole story of redemption coming together in chapter 4. Ruth is redeemed. Boaz says to the elders who are present at the gate, who witness the transfer, who see the sandal, also Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, the son of Elimelech, has been transferred to me as well for my wife. I'm taking on the responsibility. I'm taking on the role of redeeming not just the land. This isn't just a land acquisition for me, but the wife of the son of Elimelech, so that, why? So that his name will not be cut off. So that his name will be remembered, so that the family line of Elimelech will continue on. Boaz has taken this seriously. This role and responsibility he's taken on, it seems to be this big picture he has in mind. This is not just about the land, it's about so much more than that. It's about so much more than having a wife. This is about continuing the name of Elimelech. Boaz says, you've been my witnesses of all of this. I've got the sandal, let it be known. And all the people who have gathered around the gate and all the elders said, yeah, we're witnesses. We see it all go down. We've got the agreement. You've got the sandal. And they speak then a blessing over them. And the blessing is interesting. It says, May the Lord make Ruth, they speak a blessing to Boaz about Ruth, his wife to be. May the Lord make Ruth like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. Now, we don't have time to get into the layers of the story, but I would encourage you this week to read Genesis 29 and 30 and read about Rachel and Leah, to see what the people in the gates with Boaz are actually saying in this blessing over Ruth. These two women, Rachel and Leah, were wives of Jacob. The whole thing was a bit shady. Right? These two women were brought in by Jacob. Jacob was scammed into marrying the ugly one and worked for that's the words in the Bible, by the way. That's not me. I've never seen her, never met her. Jacob works some extra years so that he can have the pretty one. And both of these women were unable to have children, so they had concubines stand in for them. And then one of them sold fruit. This is all in the Bible. It's a story. One of them sold fruit, mandrakes, don't even know what that is, to the other one in exchange for being able to sleep with Jacob that night. The story is twisted. It's conniving, but then in God's kindness, God allowed both of them to have children. Is that what the people are saying in the gates to Boaz? May Ruth be like those two women whose stories were sad and twisted and conniving? No, what the people are saying is, may Ruth be like Rachel and Leah, who eventually gave birth to the 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel, God's people. May Ruth be like the women who were used by God to carry on the story of the people. Hang on to that, we'll come back to it. The people go on with the blessing. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Again, we don't have time to get into this, but I would encourage you to read with some filters Genesis 38 this week. Are the people actually saying to Boaz in the gate, may your house be like the house of Perez, the son of Tamar, a woman whose husband died, and that husband had a brother, Onan, who should have stepped in as a redeemer and taken on Tamar as his wife, but he neglected to fulfill his duty. You can read about it. So Tamar took in all of this into her own hands and disguised herself as a prostitute and conceived twins with her father-in-law. One of those sons was Perez. Is this really what the people in the gate are saying? May she be blessed like that. No, rather the people are recalling another story in their history of one who should have stepped in as a redeemer but didn't. So the unlikely one stepped in. And they had twins, and they would become the ancestors of Judah, Perez being the ancestor of Boaz. But it's a twisted story. Hang on to that. We'll circle back to it. The point is this. Ruth has been redeemed. There's been witnesses. They speak blessing. Boaz has been blessed by the people around, recalling the history of God's people to communicate. God has a plan to carry out this plan through you, Boaz, and through your new wife, Ruth. Ruth is redeemed. Is it just Ruth? Look at verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. It's not just Ruth who's redeemed, it's also Naomi. Naomi finds redemption in this story as well. Ruth becomes the wife of Boaz. We're fast forwarding now 9 months while she was unable to have children with Mahlon. Even after 10 years of them being together, we're told that the Lord now gives her conception and she bears a son. And the women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi to bless her. Remember this. Remember the story. It's not a very long one. Probably the same women who were whispering about her return. Is this really Naomi? And she says, don't call me Naomi. I am bitter. But Naomi has come back, and she's now here, and these women gather around Naomi, and they say in verse 14, I want you to look at it. "Bless the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer." Now we read that, and we think, there's where the story's going. Boaz steps in. Right? We automatically think that these women are talking about Boaz. He's the redeemer. But read on. What's it say? May his name be renowned in Israel, right? We're talking about Boaz, right? Verse 15. He will be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. Still Boaz, right? Right. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Who's the redeemer? Obed. For Naomi, Obed is the redeemer. The child is the redeemer. Naomi, bless the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. The redeemer has been born. And whether these women know it or not, they are speaking profound truth over Naomi, and not just Naomi, but us as well. All along, you believe Boaz was going to step in as your redeemer, and he did step in, and he carried out the role of redeemer, but that redeemer is not ultimately realized in Boaz. It's realized in this child, because that child then perpetuates the future of what is coming. Naomi has been redeemed practically and lawfully by Boaz, but it's fully realized in the child born to her Moabite daughter-in-law. So Naomi takes the child and holds him on her lap, and she becomes a nurse, is what the word is, but it's nanny, becomes a nanny to him. She takes on the unbelievable role of grandma. What a full circle for Naomi, isn't it? A woman who has been left empty and bitter and doubting God, in need of someone to step in and care for her in her later years. She now has a grandson from one who has made an oath to care for her. Ruth made an oath to care for her. A grandson from one who has committed to the family role of providing for her, Boaz. Naomi's desire, if we remember all the way back, Naomi's desire has been to provide rest for Ruth, that she would experience this restful contentment in life with a husband and family. And I just get this picture. Grandma's in the room. I get this picture of Naomi more content with this life than she's ever been. She's got her grandson and she's holding him. Naomi is redeemed. That story is brought full circle. There's something that's pointing out toward the future. The land is redeemed. Ruth is redeemed. Naomi is redeemed. All of them finding redemption, and it doesn't stop there. The chapter and the book of Ruth ends with a short genealogy, which is typical in writings of this day, tying things together, what was once, what had happened, what's happening now, what will be. So this omniscient narrator once again gives us this big, zoomed out picture of the story. Look at verse 18, we'll close it out. It says, now these are the generations of Perez. Interesting that it starts with Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Amminadab, Amminadab fathered Nahshon, Nahshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, Jesse fathered David. Here's what I think we see from our angle, that we are redeemed. This is how the book ends. Almost as if the author wants us to keep reading, right? To keep pushing forward from Perez, the son of Tamar, the ancestor in the line of Judah, all the way to Boaz and beyond through David. This is redemption for the people, and not just someone to step in and take over the family responsibilities of owning the land and marrying the widow and providing for the family, but a true, realized redeemer, a king who would step in, David. He was the king the people have been longing for, and in some ways, a redeemer, but he's not the ultimate redeemer, not the ultimate redeemer who would come through the line of David. He was pointing forward to someone else, the line of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, and Ruth. It's all pointing forward to that, and it means something for us. The book of Ruth is a story of redemption. It begins in a time of rebellion and chaos and hardship and grief. Everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. It was in a time period when the people didn't have a king. There was famine in Bethlehem. It was a time when there was no bread in a place called House of Bread. In a time where there was no king, there was a man by the name of My God is King, Elimelech. And he took his family in search of bread away from the land and the people of God, and his sons died, and he dies, and grief and tragedy has struck. And really the entire story is a story of grief that's woven through the whole thing. Everything has been affected by the grief they've experienced, starting with the time period of rebellion and the deep, deep loss of loved ones, and the fact that they don't have a king, but one's been promised. And I know in this series, starting in the very beginning, this was not my hope, this was not my desire or plan, but from the very beginning, many of us have had to face some of our own grief head on. I have. We've had to sit in it and experience it as we read through the story. And I told you this at the beginning of the series, but there's a reason we're calling the series A Grief Redeemed. And this is it. We've gotten to it. We see it. There's a path forward for Naomi and Ruth. These women have experienced immense amounts of grief, but they're also seeking refuge in the shadow of the wings of God. Now, can I just ask a question that's probably standing out there for many of us? Does that mean their grief is gone? No. Does it give hope to the experiences of their grief? Does it give hope to something that's out there? Yeah, but it doesn't mean the grief is gone. And friends, for us, this includes a hope for us as well. It's not just for these people before we get to 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's for us as well. I think God specifically planned the events of the story, not just with them in mind, but all of eternity in mind. The entire story is a story of unlikely, undeserving people experiencing the loving kindness of God through redemption. I'll just rattle off some of them. Naomi is a bitter, discouraged woman with a wrong perspective of God and what he's doing. She's a widow with no children. That's Naomi. Ruth is a pagan, idol-worshiping woman who is not to be allowed in with the people of God. She's married a foreigner and unable to have children, and her first husband is dead. Boaz is, from what we can tell, an aging single man whose mom was a Gentile prostitute, and he's now been proposed to by a widowed relative, only by marriage a widowed relative, and he's not even the first in line to marry her. The author takes us back into history to show us the undeserving, unlikely line before them. I think that's what the author's doing. Rachel and Leah, barren women who manipulate the situation to try to have children. Tamar, whose husband dies and his brother doesn't want to take on the role of marrying her, so she manipulates the situation to conceive with her father-in-law. The entire story, the entire line of people have experienced grief and sin and rebellion and consequences of that sin, all longing for hope. They don't want to settle there. They want something that's better, longing for something out there, longing for redemption. And friends, God is orchestrating all of that, not outside of it, not caught off guard by it, orchestrating all of it by giving Boaz and Ruth a son named Obed, meaning servant of God. Because through Obed will eventually come King David, and in the line of King David will be another unlikely couple to conceive a son whose name is, we can say it in church, Jesus, the King. It's a story of redemption. Not just a story of redemption for Ruth, but a story of redemption that's for all of us. In fact, the book of Revelation, chapter 5, it was up on the screen earlier, tells us that our weeping will be no more because the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. Conquered what? Sin and death. And he's now seated on his throne, a throne that will be forever. Redemption has come through Jesus. And you and I have experienced that in part, and that doesn't mean that our grieving is now over, or that it's ended, or that we can make sense of what we've walked through and what God has orchestrated for us. No, that grief can hang on, and we experience it in painful ways, even as we know that Jesus is coming. He's come and he's returning. The grief we experience here on this earth is at times excruciating, but one day, this king from the line of David, who came from the line of Obed the servant, who came from Boaz as one who would take on the responsibility of carrying on the line of Elimelech, my God is king. One day this King Jesus will return to redeem our grief and our pain once and for all. It's said in Revelation 21 that Jesus will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. There won't be any more mourning or crying or pain. The former things have passed away, and he who is seated on the throne will say, behold, I am making all things new. One day. Our only hope in this world that offers so much pain is not actually in this world and all that it has to offer. Rather, it's in Jesus, who has already conquered sin and death, will one day return to restore all things and make all things new, to renew, to redeem all things. So we have reason. We have reason to worship. Friends, we have a king who has come and conquered sin and death, who's returning to renew all things. We have a king, and that should draw us in to worship. And so I want to lead us toward some time of response.